Let's take a look at Labor's spending because the International Monetary Fund is warning the Albanese government to curb spending over concerns about inflation and interest rates. The IMF has thrown its support behind the Reserve Bank's restrictive monetary stance, labelling it appropriate, and is calling for support with fiscal policy that avoids an expansionary stance. Now, the central bank kept rates steady at a 13-year high of 4.35% at its December meeting. And the warning from the IMF comes after a mid-year budget update from Treasurer Jim Chalmers that revealed a projected $27 billion deficit. Kel, is Labor listening? They can't really seem to get their spending under control.
If the International Monetary Fund needs to say it, when they've been hearing it from every economist in the RBA for the last 2.5 years, 3 years, I give up. They're not going to. See, what we need to do, it's Christmas time, is thank the three wise men of Christmas, Chris Bowen, Tony Burke and Jim Chalmers. Chris Bowen, because he was going to reduce your power bill by $275 and instead it went up by $1,000. Tony Burke, when he was in industrial relations, made sure the unions had more power, making life more difficult and everything more expensive for small and middle-sized businesses, just harder for everyone, and they passed the costs on to you. And then we had Jim Chalmers, whose approach to everything is the one that troubles the IMF. You just throw money at everything. What we're experiencing now, and what you experience when you try to buy stuff for Christmas, it's the hard landing we weren't supposed to have. This is the hard landing that we were promised, and it's happening now, which is why you're having half a ham instead of a full leg.
Well, that's what's happening. Australians are certainly feeling the pinch this Christmas, and many are said to be cutting back on buying large legs of ham for Christmas and are instead opting for half a leg instead as they do what they can in this cost of living crisis. Food company Primo Foods says that consumers have been searching for value in the lead up to Christmas. Aldi has been performing really well and consumers are spending less time dining out and more time gathering at home. Does this surprise you, Freya?
Not really. As Kel said, I think households really are doing it tough. Food has gone up by 10% since the last election, and it is an absolute train wreck for Labor. And you notice they have repeatedly tried to blame inflation on Donald Trump, on Ukraine, on Netanyahu, on anyone but themselves. And most recently, their newest scapegoat has been the RBA. Oh, it's all the RBA's fault. They're the ones messing around with monetary policy and causing this all to go awry. But that is factually untrue. They have added $347 billion in extra spending since the election. That equates to $33,000 per household. Do you feel like you're getting an extra $33,000 in value from the government? I certainly do not. All that money is doing is fueling inflation. And the inflation we're seeing now, you've also got to remember, there's a lag between when the government spends money and when we actually see that it resulting in inflation. They have now been in for 2.5 years. That is about the perfect amount of time to actually see the true impact of government spending flow through the economy and result in inflation. And what are we seeing? Inflation is remaining too high. Core inflation, the RBA's preferred measure, much too high, out of the 2 to 3% band. And we know this is an Australian problem because it is a homegrown inflation problem. Inflation on products produced and consumed here is higher than inflation on products we're importing from overseas. So we know this is an Australian problem. We know that this is a result of government spending. And unfortunately, we know this government will look for anyone to blame but themselves.
And it's sad, Kel, isn't it, when we're really seeing this play out at Christmas time and people have to cut back?
Well, they're maxing their credit cards. What people know is if we're going to have Christmas this year, come January we will and February, because we'll still be suffering the pain then, they max their credit cards is what people do, because you've got to give the family Christmas and you've got to give the little kids Christmas, and so people do that. Don't you reckon, Gabrielle, come the next election, all Peter Dutton has to stand up and say is, do you feel better off now than 3 years ago? And he's got a one.
Well, absolutely. That's what Trump said, and that certainly helped him get elected. But he makes a point. It's felt right here in Australia, and I think everyone can relate to that. I don't know how many people are better off right now than they were 3-4 years ago. Please let me know.
We're going to have a show of hands. Oh, nobody's better off than they were 3 years ago.
No one. It's sad, isn't it?